You're listening to the number one podcast for nonprofit leaders, getting your nonprofit fully funded. This is the Fundraising Masterminds Podcast. Well, welcome back to another episode of Fundraising Masterminds. I'm Jason Galasinski, your host, and with me, Jim Dempsey, my co-host.
Hey, Jason. Hey, everybody.
And we are so excited that you guys are back for another great episode of Fundraising Masterminds. And today we are going to be talking about foundations.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about the truth about foundations because there's a lot of common misconceptions about foundations out there. And we wanted to bring some of our wisdom and knowledge to the table with the years of experience that we have. You know, Jim, together, we both have about 60 years of combined development experience.
Yep.
You work for one of the largest Christian organizations in the world.
Yes. Right.
Cru.
Yep.
And I founded a company, Fundeezy, that also works with thousands of nonprofits over the world. And both together, you and I have raised millions and millions of dollars for the kingdom.
Probably even close to $1 billion, I would say. Yeah.
There's a lot of
experience
between the two of us. And so I wanted to talk to you specifically about foundations because I think there's a lot of confusion out there. But before we do that, I would love it if you guys could hit that subscribe button on YouTube because we are putting out new episodes every single week and we don't want you to miss any of them. So hit that subscribe button and also the bell notification so that you don't miss any future episodes. We also have the ability to listen on the go. You can look us up on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify and other podcast platforms out there. We're just everywhere. So yeah, let's get into it, Jim.
Yeah.
So the common perception of a foundation is that there's plenty of them out there.
Right.
We know that they're required by law to give money.
Absolutely. Certain percentage of their assets.
Obviously, we want to, craft an appeal and write as many and get as many appeal letters out to as many foundations as possible because it's just a numbers game, right?
Sure.
Eventually, one of them should pick us up.
Yep.
And so then we get sucked into this, the reason why a foundation hasn't jumped on board is because the appeal isn't good enough.
Right. Yeah. But, I think a lot of people feel like that all I need to do is just write a good proposal. If I can find a grant writer and they can craft our cause and we put a good enough proposal out there that we're just going to get our project funded. And those are all current perceptions of foundations. And I will say that every one of those are incorrect at this point, Jason.
Well, let me ask you a question before I commit to watching this whole episode or listening to this whole episode.
Okay.
Because I might bail on you.
Have you just ended right now?
I'm just saying,
the stop button.
Are you fundamentally against foundations?
Oh, not in the least.
Okay.
From my standpoint, you need to diversify your portfolio. You should never put all your eggs in one basket or put all your money in one mutual fund. You need to diversify. I believe that we have certain tools in our tool belt as development, as nonprofit leaders. The Perfect Vision Dinner is a tool in the tool belt. Direct mail is a tool in the tool belt. Foundations are a tool in the tool belt.
Right.
So it's a tool that we can use, but I believe that there are definitely misperceptions that are out there about foundations. And what we want to do is today in this episode, we want to debunk some of those myths.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
What's myth number one?
Well, first of all, you talked about, are there a lot of foundations out there? And absolutely there's a lot of foundations out there. The problem is we've got to discover who those foundations are that want to support us. Because I can tell you, easily 80 to 90% of those foundations would have no interest in us based on our cause and who we are as a Christian organization. As we start to research foundations, you'll find that just as a funnel, things really narrow down at the end. And the number of foundations that are interested in supporting Christian causes and even what we do within that. Now, they may be interested if we are a rescue mission that's a Christian rescue mission. They may be interested in that. But if we're doing evangelism, if we are rescuing babies, those are the kinds of things that make that end of the funnel very narrow. So the number of foundations foundations that are interested in us. That's the real key. Is there any question or argument that there aren't a lot of foundations? There are, for sure. But are there a lot of foundations that want to support us? Probably not. That's definitely out there.
Well, that makes sense, in terms of like if you were starting a business in a certain city, you want to do the research on your competitors and figure out, who am I going to be rubbing shoulders with?
Right.
And it's the same thing with foundations in the sense of if you've got 100 foundations that you're trying to just throw appeals out to,
right.
Do your research, in figuring out if these people are even aligned with you to begin with, because you're probably wasting your time by just, blasting out.
Right.
Everything.
Well, we'll talk about some of the things that are important to getting a foundation grant, and research is one of those, and that's what you need to do. But we'll talk about that in just a minute.
Okay.
But really, you're absolutely right. You need to determine, just as you would with your business, who's your audience.
Yeah.
And that, for us, which foundations are interested in what we're doing. But you also talked about competition out there, and frankly, there is a lot of competition for the attention of foundations. There are organizations, Christian organizations, doing what you're doing.
Right.
There's Christian organizations that are doing some very valuable things, but they're different than you. They have a different mission, but all are going for that same handful of foundations.
Right. All right. So that's the first common misperception about foundation, is that there is this broad pool of foundations available at all.
Almost a vast and unlimited pool of foundations waiting to give us money.
Yeah. So, we have to spend all our time and energy trying to figure out how to tap into these. Perhaps there's not as many as we might think there are.
Coining another phrase I have, into the critical few. What are the critical few that are interested in what we're doing?
All right, let's talk about the second common misperception of a foundation, Jim.
Well, the common misperception is that you can just blanket an appeal out to all foundations and you'll get a great result. And frankly, nothing could be further from the truth. Foundations are often treated like corporations, like an entity, when in reality, foundations are made up of individuals.
Right.
And those individuals all have unique desires. Every foundation was created by a person or for a particular cause.
Right.
And so you have got to find out what is their mission, what is their vision, and you need to find where's that intersection between what are our interests and what are theirs, and where are those intersections, and where they intersect, there's what we need to target right there. So every proposal that you need to do, every mailing, every communication needs to be very unique. And in fact, where direct mail, you could send out 100 letters and maybe get 2 responses back. You send out 100 proposals that are generic proposals of foundations, I can guarantee that you're going to get 100 no's back from people. I've got one foundation executive director that told me one time that they intentionally turn down every new proposal that they get because of they want to find out really why people, are they really interested in that? But what happens is that too often people just give up. They got rejected, so they never come back again.
Well, that's interesting. I guess one of my questions that I had was if you do discover who your critical few foundations are, maybe there's 2 or 3.
Yep.
Could you not craft an appeal for those 2 or 3? I mean, why can't it be the same appeal and just change the name?
Well, absolutely, it could be, but to be honest with you, in reality, there's only one Diane Dempsey out there. And if I treated my wife like any other woman instead of a unique person, I doubt that I would be married today. So it's so important that we look for the uniquenesses, even with a few. And should you look for that few, yes, but you need to still treat them uniquely.
Okay, Jim. So you got me thinking, but I mean, assuming that, it really boils down to finding your audience and it really boils down to a couple,
what they're interested in.
Why can't I just hire a person to do this job? To do the research, to focus on personalizing and really focus on getting these foundations. Is it worth doing that?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, Jason. The reality is that there is, I believe, a common misperception that all we need to do is find a great grant writer and write a proposal, and we're going to get our cause funded. And to be honest with you, in talking with foundation executive directors over 38 years, I've found that a proposal is actually really a small component of that. In fact, I'll tell you a story about a colleague one time.
Yeah.
He had established a good, strong relationship with a founder of a foundation. She and her husband had started a foundation in the 1940s, and he passed away, and she was now running the foundation herself in her late 80s.
Okay.
And he went up to visit her one time in her home, in her mansion in upstate New York. It was in the dead of winter, and so he was not looking forward to going there anyway because of the cold.
Right.
He was ushered into the house by a servant, and he found her warming herself up on the fire. Well, after about an hour in the conversation, the fire started to die down. She asked him if he would mind going over and stoking the fire and getting it back up again, which he, of course, accepted without any problem. And she said, if you wouldn't mind, please go over and use that scrap paper that's over there, because it's a great fire starter. So he notices that there are 2-3 foot high stacks of foundation proposals. Wow. So he was curious. He asked her, are these foundation proposals? And she said, oh my, yes, they are. We get so many of these. I needed some place to dispose of these. And she said, well, quite frankly, we really only fund proposals that we understand, we know the people, we know the organization, and frankly, we don't always require a proposal from the people we intend to fund. So what my colleague was looking at were a lot of proposals that were sent in that they had no interest in and no desire and never intended to fund.
Kind of what you were telling me with the story, it kind of reminds me of the show Shark Tank. You know, we all are familiar with those sharks. You know, or even America's Got Talent. You know, you've got these judges, you know, the sharks or the judges, you know, you've got these people who have the ability to change your life.
Right.
You know, like if you get one of these guys on your team, you're set.
You're set, yeah.
And I think we tend to think, you know, oh, if I could just get, you know, a minute with Simon,
right?
You know, my music career will take off.
Yeah.
Or, you know, if I could just have a phone call with that shark, you know, maybe we see the shark at a restaurant or something.
Right.
We go into
Mark Cuban. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. We go in and we're like, you know, hey, here's what I'm all about, and I want you to invest in me. I mean, like if the guy doesn't know you,
right?
You're just like a cold salesman coming up to him. What do you think your chances of success are going to be?
Zero. Absolutely. In fact, even on the show, when they make presentations, you know, your odds are still very low that they're going to fund it. Yeah, exactly the same way with foundations, Jason. It's really the same way for sure.
Well, the final misconception is that, you know, if you write a proposal, you will eventually get an answer.
Yeah. Well, all of our research has shown that it takes 6 times asking the same foundation to get a gift. So in reality, 3 times going to the same foundation and you're just halfway in there. So the old adage is that you get in line, you stay in line, and get to the head of the line. That is so important in this process.
Now, when you say you got to ask 6 times, are you saying just send the same letter out 6 times?
No, absolutely not. In fact, oftentimes you have to put new proposals out every time, but it's 6 times the same foundation. That's not like saying send the same proposal to 6 different foundations. You literally have to go to the same foundation 6 times before you get your first funded proposal.
Well, Jim, would you mind if we move into solutions here?
Absolutely.
Because you're painting kind of a bleak picture.
Yeah.
I mean, the general, if you just go onto YouTube and search, how to find a grant or
Right,
how to get
right.
there's lots of people that are very optimistic.
Right.
There's a lot of people that are like, oh, let me show you, if you just do this and this and this,
Yep.
you're going to get,
Yep.
in line, and then
Yep.
they make it sound like it's possible.
Yeah.
And so far on this podcast, I'm feeling pretty depressed. Like it's,
Yeah.
if literally my foundation is burning my proposal because, they get so many of them, then that doesn't make me even feel like it's worth it.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you're telling me, if you do it a certain way, it is possible to get foundations, and it is possible. There are foundations out there.
That's right.
So maybe it's a mindset thing. Maybe the popular advice out there on YouTube or whatever is like kind of common sense.
Right,
Is maybe not the best advice.
Yeah.
So Jim, out of the 40 years of experience that you've had working with nonprofits and foundations, you've really found that there's 3 keys to
that's right.
breaking through this nightmare that you've kind of painted at the beginning of this podcast.
Yeah.
So would you mind sharing those 3 keys?
Absolutely. Jason, don't get me wrong. I mean, I even teach a seminar on how to write good proposals for foundations. But Jason, in reality, there's 3 secrets to success in getting a grant. The first is what we talked about earlier, research.
Right.
Finding out which foundations are interested in supporting us.
Right.
We want to look at categories such as what kind of organization are we? Because every foundation gives to a series of categories of kind of organizations that they want to support. And they also help particular programs and projects. So when you find that intersection between their interest in a particular cause and the kind of organization they support, then it's so important that we find that intersection. And just because it looks like a marriage made in heaven doesn't mean it will be. It really is important for you to circle back and to even ask a question as simple as, it seems like we are together on this, but is that accurate? And I can't tell you how often foundations have really appreciated the fact that I want to make sure that I'm not wasting their time in putting a proposal that there's no interest in. Because I've gone to them and they've turned me down and said, this isn't a marriage made in heaven.
Approaching it like a relationship, and having that respect for the person rather than just trying to get your attention.
Exactly. Or blanket shotgunning to everybody.
Right. So it's important to research. That's one of the secrets for sure. So Jim, what's the second secret for success of getting through foundations?
The second secret is persistence. That means staying with it. Remember I said that it takes 6 appeals, 6 proposals to get one to be accepted on there. So staying with it, staying on them, and making sure that they respond back. Now, many
what do you
foundations
mean by staying on them? Because I don't want to annoy them. I
right.
don't want to send them a letter every month.
Sure,
So,
and there's a fine line, and
Right.
you need to look at the requirements that are on the 990 and all the research for the proposals that are out there, all that's out there in the Foundation Center, and everything you know through your research, what's their requirements. Because some foundations require you to only ask one time a year. So this may be a 6-year process for a foundation that will only require you to submit a proposal once a year. So you need to look at that. But what I mean by that is, once more, look at these people as individuals, this entity as individuals. And so calling, asking questions, trying to touch base with them. But so many foundation executives now are busy. We're busier than ever. And so they like it when you at least continue to try and communicate with them. In fact, I've had many say to me, Jim, thanks for hanging in there with me. As you can imagine, I'm very busy, but it's important that you hang in there and you stay with them.
Well, I actually have a friend of mine who runs the foundation. They give away over $600,000 a year. in their foundation. And, we had stricken up a conversation about them even possibly getting involved with Zambia. But at this point in time, nothing has really aspired.
Right.
But because, I see him once in a while and we're friends and we know each other,
Yep.
it's more important to me to have that relationship with him. And I think it's as soon as it gets into, I'm trying to get money from you and I'm do whatever it takes to get money from you, and you start to seem desperate.
Right.
That's where things start to get a little icky.
Yeah. Well, it's important to know that foundations are always a few years ahead. So even if you develop a communication strategy with a foundation and they love what you're doing, chances are that they won't even have the funding available for 2 or 3 years.
That's exactly what happened when I was initiated a call with him. He said, we have a routine that we follow, and we have a board, and, right now we're all booked up, but there's certain things that happen. We win some, we lose some, some people move off, some people move on. And so I really got the impression that even if a foundation is interested, it just may not be the right time.
Absolutely.
And so it's like, you just have to keep persisting.
Right. You need to find the balance and you need to stay on it. Yeah.
Right.
That's right. Once again, I have to go back to get in line, stay in line, get to the head of the line. It's so important to do that.
Okay. Well, that's secret number 2.
Yep.
What is secret number 3 for
Secret number 3 should be common sense, but it isn't. It's relationships. You need to, once again, focus in on these as individuals and not as a corporation or an entity. Do all you can to develop a relationship with an individual. Find ways to get in there to an individual. All foundations are required to submit a 990 PF to the federal government. That opens up the door to you, so to speak, because they have to list their board members, they have to list their contact information, they have to list other organizations that they support. So even if a foundation doesn't give anything more than a P.O. box, and that's what we're seeing a lot more nowadays, they're only putting P.O. boxes and no phone numbers, nothing that you could just walk in the door and talk to someone. But you do have ways to get in the back door, and that's many times through those relationships for those board members. Find out there. Maybe your board member knows some of the people. Maybe other organizational leaders. One way that might surprise you is that I've actually gone to some of the organizational leaders that they have supported from organizations that they've supported, and I've gone to them and say, I know you get funding from XYZ Foundation. Would you be interested in helping me get to know the principles of that foundation?
Right.
And it's just so important. And then when you connect with someone, develop a relationship with them and just realize that it takes time.
Well, going back to my example, that was actually one of the big takeaways that I got from that was essentially he said, it's really up to the board. It's not even to my control. Yeah. So really the next step was I need to get to know the board.
Right.
And so that was my follow-up was, hey, when does your board meet?
Right.
And is it possible that you could get me an appointment with your board the next time they meet so that I can, get together with them in person, and be able so that they can hear my heart, they can hear where we're coming from, we can show them what we're doing. And not so much make a fancy proposal, but more along the lines of, he would vouch for me.
Yeah, that person would get you your foot in the door at least.
Right.
And sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah. So I like what you said about relationships because it's a good reminder that, these guys who run foundations are real people. They've got, and I always think, it's a great exercise.
Right.
Whether you run a business, whether you're looking for investors, whether you're, whatever it is, whenever you're appealing to a third party, it's a really great exercise to mentally put yourself in their shoes and almost play like the devil's advocate or not, almost play the counter side.
Yeah, that's right.
And say, if I were a board member and I had $600,000
would I give to us, right?
What would I do?
Yeah.
And I had hundreds of thousands of proposals coming in. How would I determine which one of these to use
is important. Yeah,
and I think there's a lot of clarity that can come when you start thinking like a board member of a foundation.
That's right.
You're suddenly going to understand how to get around the masses.
Yeah. So those are the 3 secrets to getting a grant from a foundation.
Well, thanks, Jim. That was incredibly helpful.
Sure.
And if you found that to be helpful, please hit the like button on YouTube and a comment. Just share your thoughts, what you thought. Let us know which of the 3 secrets really spoke to your heart, or if you had an aha moment. We'd love to hear from you because, we love to sit in the studio and make these, but we very rarely hear from people on social media and stuff. So if this is speaking to you and it's blessing you, let us know.
And especially if they worked, if you used something that we suggested and it worked, we need to know that.
Yeah, we would love to hear from you. Don't be shy. We're here and we want to help you. So if you are on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to this podcast. We have weekly podcast episodes coming out for nonprofit leaders, and we don't want you to miss any. So make sure you hit that bell so you get a notification from YouTube about it. And if you also want to listen on the go, we are available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and some other podcast platforms. So you can look us up there. It's Fundraising Masterminds Podcast. But Jim, this has been incredibly helpful information, and thank you for just helping us straighten out the foundation issue.
My pleasure. We're here to provide good quality information and training. We want to be the premier resource for all things nonprofit.
So thanks again for tuning in to the Fundraising Masterminds podcast, and we will see you next time.
Take care.